Supreme Court ballot ruling, Iran economic outcast, asylum visa revocations, and Canada's tariff war. Greetings, humanity. Let's grok the news. We cover the world's headlines, but first, a deep dive into the most important story in the world today. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The United States Supreme Court cleared a key path for President Donald Trump to advance restrictions on mail-in ballots ahead of the November midterm elections. In an unsigned emergency order, the justices lifted a lower court freeze that had blocked parts of an executive order that Trump signed earlier this year. The order directs the Postal Service to help determine which voters receive mail ballots and instructs the Department of Homeland Security to compile lists of United States citizens that could be used to check state voter rolls for non-citizens. The Supreme Court majority found the nation was likely to suffer irreparable harm if the freeze remained in place. 3 liberal justices, of course, dissented from the decision. The ruling does not resolve the full legality of the executive order. A lower court continues to examine that question. With early voting set to begin in some states within weeks and Election Day less than 3 months away, the practical effect for the midterms remains uncertain. President Trump has repeatedly argued that mail-in voting creates opportunities for fraud and has made election security a central theme of his second term. The administration says the measures will strengthen confidence in the vote by ensuring only eligible citizens cast ballots. Critics, including some state election officials, contend that the changes could create confusion and logistical challenges so close to the election. The Postal Service has already begun preparing to implement new procedures under the order. The executive order also calls for the creation of what the White House terms state citizenship lists. Officials say these lists would draw on federal data to help states maintain accurate voter rolls. Several Democratic-led states have already filed lawsuits challenging the administration's authority to impose such requirements. Republican officials in other states have welcomed the move as a necessary safeguard. This is not the first time the Supreme Court has weighed in on mail ballot rules this year. In a separate June decision, the court upheld state laws allowing ballots postmarked by Election Day to be counted if they arrive even several days later. That ruling went against the Trump administration's position. Monday's emergency order is more limited and temporary in nature, focusing on the administration's ability to prepare and plan rather than issuing a final judgment on the merits. Justice Department officials have indicated they plan to deploy monitors to polling places and mail processing facilities. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon has said that the department intends to send roughly 1,000 observers to ensure fair administration. State secretaries of state across the political spectrum have stressed that elections remain primarily a state responsibility under the Constitution. Election administrators in battleground states say they are reviewing the order's requirements while continuing preparations for November. Some have warned that sudden changes to mail ballot procedures could affect military and overseas voters who rely heavily on the Postal Service. Others note that many states already maintain rigorous verification processes for absentee ballots. This observer thinks that they have nothing to worry about then. The midterm elections will decide the control of both the House and the Senate. Polls show a closely divided electorate, with economic concerns and the ongoing conflict involving Iran also dominating voter attention. President Trump has used recent appearances to urge states to comply with the federal guidelines on voter eligibility. Homeland Security Secretary Mark Mullen has previously warned that states failing to address non-citizen registration could face funding consequences or investigations. Legal experts expect additional court filings in the coming days as states and voting rights groups respond to the Supreme Court's order. The administration has signaled it will move quickly to issue further guidance to the Postal Service and state election officials. For now, the High Court's action allows planning to proceed, while the underlying constitutional and statutory questions remain unresolved. The decision arrives as the White House continues a broader push on election infrastructure, including reviews of voting equipment and data-sharing protocols with the states. Officials emphasize the goal is to restore public trust. Opponents counter that the timing risks disrupting orderly administration. Both sides agree the next several weeks will be critical as ballots begin to move through the mail system. Well, in this observer's opinion, this is a step long overdue, and it's unfortunate the Supreme Court did not rule on the merits of the case completely. However, this is progress, and somebody needs to have a check and a balance on these renegade states run by seditious secretaries of state using their election system to thwart the will of the American people and empower one party forever. I'm Robert Gardner, using GROK each weekday to truthfully summarize the news. I season it up with my opinions, and you get that not on every serving, but it makes it tasty. We review a roundup of the most critical reports in the world right after this. God with Us, the story of Jesus, blends the Gospels into one inspired narrative. Divided into daily Bible studies, this book presents the story of Jesus from his birth to his ascension. Find God with Us by me, Robert Gardner, at Amazon.com. Now, we grok the news with headlines from around the world. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has announced Operation Economic Outcast, expanding sanctions on Iran to cut remaining revenue from digital assets, gold, technology, aviation, and shipping. The United States sanctioned more than 60 entities and warned other nations they risk exclusion from the dollar system if they continue business with Tehran. Iran vowed retaliation as the conflict nears the 6-month mark. This observer will remind everybody the conflict is not much of a conflict lately. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The State Department is preparing to revoke up to 200,000 business and tourist visas held by foreigners who later applied for asylum. Officials called the step the largest mass revocation in United States history and says it targets those who entered as short-term visitors and then sought permanent status. Legal challenges are expected. Dateline, Ottawa, Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney said that Canada will impose matching tariffs on United States steel, dairy, appliances, and electronics beginning September 8th, after Washington applied 50% duties on $20 billion of Canadian goods. Well, you see, Carney had suspended any further talks and described this United States tariff as an attack on Canadian sovereignty. They did actually have a deal until just the last few hours. You know, the only country other than Canada to enact punitive tariffs against the United States is China. And this whole thing broke down because Carney refuses to deal with China shipping its goods through Canada to avoid the tariffs. Whose side is Carney on? Certainly not the Canadian citizens. They're facing some real economic trouble now. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The United States has removed Syria from its list of state sponsors of terrorism, lifting decades-old restrictions that blocked foreign investment. The move follows the fall of the previous regime and is intended to open pathways for reconstruction funding and private capital. Syrian officials welcomed the change as removal of a long-standing stigma. Are you paying attention, Iran? Dateline, Kiev. British Prime Minister Andy Burnham and French leaders pledged faster deliveries of air defense systems and classified technology to Ukraine during Independence Day ceremonies. Burnham confirmed that Britain will share Storm Shadow missile blueprints despite Russian warnings of consequences for the toothless United Kingdom. Seriously, they have hardly any air force anymore. The Royal Navy has rusted to the bottom of the sea. The UK ain't what it used to be. Its average residents poorer even than Mississippi in the United States, and that's considered a poor state. Dateline, the Eastern Pacific Ocean. United States forces conducted a strike on a vessel suspected of drug trafficking, killing 2 people in the first such action in 2 months. The operation is part of a broader campaign that has resulted in more than 200 deaths across dozens of interdictions targeting the cartel smuggling routes. Dateline, Taipei. Taiwan's military detected Chinese aircraft and naval vessels operating near the island, while Britain called for restraint over recent Chinese drills. Taiwan continues urban defense exercises designed to prepare troops and civilians for potential conflict scenarios in densely populated areas. Dateline, Port-au-Prince, Haiti. A gang raid on a neighborhood overlooking the capital left at least 47 people dead and 22 injured overnight. United Nations officials reported the attack, and residents demanded stronger security measures against repeated violence by armed groups that control parts of the city. Dateline, Pomas, France. A tornado tore through southwestern France, injuring more than 40 people and damaging hundreds of homes in the village of Pomas and surrounding communities. Rescue teams are assessing the full extent of destruction after the storm struck with little warning yesterday. Dateline, Tokyo, Japan. Typhoon Sodel is tracking toward southern Japan and northern Taiwan, bringing forecasts of heavy rain and strong winds. Taiwan has already reported 1 death and 4 people missing from a separate weather system affecting its southern and eastern regions. Dateline, Juba, in the South Sudan. 2 Ethiopian United Nations peacekeepers were killed and 7 others injured in an ambush in Jonglei State. The attack raises the number of peacekeepers killed worldwide this year to 9, according to United Nations officials monitoring a fragile security situation. Dateline, Ankara, Turkey. Libya's army chief, General Muhammad Ali Ahmed al-Haddad, and 4 others died when their aircraft crashed after taking off from the Turkish capital. Signal was lost shortly after departure. Turkey and Libya are investigating the cause. Dateline, Central Nigeria. Gunmen abducted 28 Muslim travelers, including women and children who were traveling to a religious festival. The attack occurred on a highway in a region that has seen repeated kidnappings by armed groups in recent months. Dateline, the Gaza Strip. Israeli strikes and tank fire killed 4 people, including 2 children, according to local hospital officials. The incident occurred 1 week after a United States delegation urged Israel to reduce the intensity of its operations in the region. Dateline, Jakarta, Indonesia. Authorities intensified aerial firefighting as wildfires in peatland regions produced thick haze that has spread into Malaysia. Residents in affected cities have held outdoor prayers seeking rain, while health officials monitor the air quality. Dateline, Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Iran attempted to assassinate one of his sons. The claim comes amid heightened regional tensions and the ongoing United States-led campaign against Iranian economic and military capabilities. This official thinks that the sooner this successfully ends with the unconditional surrender or extinction of the Iranian regime, the better for Israel, the better for America, the better for the world, and the better for the proud people of Persia. Dateline, Seoul, South Korea. South Korean officials pledged assistance to President Trump in efforts to restart talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The offer follows recent United States decisions to adjust joint military exercises with Seoul, who refused to help the United States with the situation in Iran. Dateline, Moscow. Russia publicly displayed the deployment of nuclear-capable Oreshnik missiles in Belarus. The move coincides with continued Ukrainian long-range strikes and Western commitments to supply additional defense systems to Kiev. In a war that evidently Europe and many, too many in the United States, are driving against Russia, and they're willing to expend the last Ukrainian to do it. Folks, that nation's manhood is hollowed out. Meanwhile, the globalist vultures of Europe plan to pounce and pick the carcass when the fighting ends. You watch. And Dateline, Washington, D.C. The United States economy expanded at its fastest pace in 2 years during the latest quarter, driven by strong consumer spending. Officials said that the figures exceeded earlier forecasts and reflected continued resilience in household demand, despite global uncertainties. Well, you see, most people buy what they need. That's a capitalist economy. The speculation economy that overlies Western capitalism, driven by central banks and huge investment corporations. That's not capitalism, folks. That's speculation. That's control. That's oligarchy. And nobody likes that. I thank you for listening. Please join me tomorrow to once again GROK the News. I'm Robert Gardner. Godspeed and God bless.